The temperatures are starting to drop and pumpkin spice lattes are back. If you're anything like me, when fall starts to approach, you start thinking about Halloween projects. And an easy Halloween project that I'd like to walk you through today are these wooden jack-o'-lanterns. These wooden jack-o'-lanterns are great to make a couple of and put on your front step for Halloween. But what I like to do is batch out quite a few and sell them locally. These are a great way to make a few extra dollars to put towards that tool wish list. And I'm going to show you how to take this $3.98 fence picket from the big box store and turn it into two of these wooden jack-o'-lanterns that you can sell easily for $15 to $25 a piece. This is a standard cedar fence picket that I got from the big box store for $3.98. It's 6 feet tall, 6 inches wide, and 5/8 of an inch thick. With a little bit of planning, I can get two wooden jack-o'-lanterns out of this. You need to pick through the piles when you're at the big box store to make sure you get some that look nice. Lots of them have cracks or broken edges or are full of knots. When you're looking for them, make sure the bottom couple feet are free of knots for the most part, so you can use that for the faces. Other knots you can shift to the backs or the sides so that those are hidden away from the front of the wooden jack-o'-lantern. The first optional step that I like to do is run it through my planer to get it just a little bit smoother. These come from the big box store with one furry side and one side that's a bit smoother but still not great. Running it through the planer saves me a bit of sanding on the end. But if you don't have a planer, feel free to just hit it with a sander once you get the main body of the jack-o'-lantern built. In the end, it doesn't need to be perfect. It's an outdoor project, and the individual flaws in the board are going to give your wooden jack-o'-lanterns a unique characteristic of their own. Let's go ahead and run this through my planer though, and get started with the build. Now that this board's been ran through my planer, it's definitely a lot smoother and each side looks great. We're not looking for perfection here. I'm not trying to flatten the board. I was just trying to save myself some sanding at the end of the project. If you don't have a planer, go ahead and skip this step. There's two things I'd like to point out. Number one is typically from the big box store, these are going to come stapled with a price tag on the end. Make sure you remove that metal staple in the price tag. You don't want to accidentally run that little piece of metal through any of your tools. The second thing is these cedar fence pickets can have a lot of splinters. I don't recommend using gloves when you're doing woodworking, as you could get caught in a saw or one of your other tools. But just be careful when you're feeding the board through your saws or your planer so you don't catch one of those splinters in your hand. I've gotten quite a few, and it's not ideal. Now I need to get my work area set up so I can start using those templates to route the faces. Now your work table setup is going to probably be different than mine. I use my table saw along with this old flattening jig that I made years ago. I use it as a wasteboard so that when I put the fence picket down on it, and if the router bit goes through a little bit when it's cutting the template, it doesn't cut into my work table, it just cuts into my wasteboard. I'm going to go ahead and get a clamp on this so that my work surface isn't moving around on me. I've got a couple clamps on there now to hold down my work surface. The next thing I want to do is mark off 8.5 inches on the wooden fence picket. The main body of our wooden jack-o'-lanterns is going to be 8.5 inches tall. So I want to keep that measurement in mind while I'm placing my template to make sure the face is centered within that length. If I maintain that 8.5 inches, then I should be able to get two wooden jack-o'-lanterns out of this one fence picket. The next thing that I need to do is go ahead and gather up all the tools that I'm going to need to route out these faces. Looks like I'm set with all the things I need to start routing out the faces. I've got two templates that I've picked out. I've got 12 different design templates available in my online store that you can pick up if you want to try to do this yourself. I've picked out the winking jack-o'-lantern and the Frankenstein to do today. We've got some two-sided tape that'll be used to adhere the templates to the wooden fence picket, along with one clamp to help hold those down as well. Of course, we've got my DeWalt plunge router, which works great for this process. Finally, we have the integral part of the process, a 1/8 inch downcut bit and a guide bushing. This guide bushing has a 5/16 outer diameter and a 1/4 inch inner diameter. Now, a lot of woodworkers are probably familiar with the flush trim bit or a pattern bit. That bit is designed with a bearing that rides along a template to flush up the wood along with the pattern of the template. This one's rather large, but you can get them in varying sizes. The problem with this bit means your blade is riding extremely close to the template. When you're going into the template holes, you run the risk of hitting the template with your bit, even when using a smaller one. Using the guide bushing installed in your router, the 1/8 inch bit is positioned inside of that so that the guide bushing prevents it from ever touching the side of the router. These templates are designed to take into account the offset of the guide bushing so that they will ride perfectly around the edge and create a nice even cut for the face in the front of the jack-o'-lantern. There's a variety of different kinds of guide bushings for different routers, but this one's fairly universal and installs perfectly into my DeWalt router. The bottom piece simply inserts into the plunge router base and the top O-ring clamps it down. Now I just need to install the bit into the router. As you can see, with that guide bushing installed and the bit centered in the middle, it's able to ride along the template without a chance of the bit touching the template at all. And that's how the guide bushing works in conjunction with the bit, so when it's installed in your router, it can easily ride along the edge of that template without coming too close and risking hitting it. Now let's go ahead and get a couple pieces of tape put on one of these templates, center it on that 8.5 inches, and start cutting our first face. The two-sided tape is pretty sturdy in holding the template down, along with the fact that you're pushing down on your router the entire time, and its base plate is also holding the template down as well. But I like to add one clamp on there that I typically have to move around throughout the process so it doesn't get in the way of my router, but it just gives me a little extra security that that template is staying on there tight. The great thing about the plunge router is I can position it before the bit is even down near my template. So once I get the guide bushing into one of those holes, I know I'm set to go. Now keep in mind, we're not routing out the entire hole. We're just going around the edge of the template and cutting out that piece of the face. It typically takes me about 3 passes to get one piece cut out, and I slowly lower the bit with the plunge router on each pass until I can feel it break through. You need to use caution because then at that point you have a loose piece right under your router base. So make sure you keep that captured in. And one thing I like about using the downcut bit is it's pushing my sawdust down and kind of locking in that piece a little bit. It should go without saying that you should never make a cut that you don't feel comfortable with. So make sure that you've made your workpiece and the template as secure as possible. I'm going to go ahead after all this talking and finally make the first cut. I always make sure to hold down the plunge router until it's completely stopped because you know you have a loose piece in there that can be moving around a little bit. But once you've made enough passes, you can feel it break loose and you can shut that router off. Once that's done, I like to vacuum it out and do another pass to clean up all the edges. Now that I've got one eye cut out, it's time to tackle the other eye, nose, and mouth. It's a good idea to study the template really well so you know what path you're kind of going on because you're mostly going by feel as you're routing that guide bearing along the template. With the whole template cut, it's just a matter of removing the clamp, and I like to use a chisel to get under there to release the tape. Next, I just have to head over to the chop saw, cut it off at that 8.5 inches, and I can go ahead and do the other face. Now we've got our first winking jack-o'-lantern face. You definitely want to watch out where those knots are laying out in the wood. This one ended up in the face, but I kind of like it. It looks like a mole on the chin. So we could easily go ahead and use the same template and batch out another one of the winking jack-o'-lantern. But we're going to switch to the Frankenstein template, and everything else is exactly the same. We're going to get everything set up, use the router with that guide bushing to cut out another template. And there you have it. We have two nice, cleanly cut wooden jack-o'-lantern faces. These were easy to reproduce and didn't require a CNC router to do it. Now it's time to get away from the router and start using the table saw to cut down the pieces we need for the rest of the wooden jack-o'-lantern box. The next step is to cut the two backs for each of the two jack-o'-lanterns, and then two pieces that will be cut eventually into the sides for the jack-o'-lanterns. Now keep in mind, these first face boards we cut were at 8.5 inches. So I need to cut these at 8.5 inches as well because they're going to be going the height of the main box of the wooden jack-o'-lanterns. But just in case I didn't get quite to 8.5 inches, what I'm going to do is instead of cutting at 8.5 inches, I'm going to use my crosscut sled and make sure I'm getting the exact same height of these boards and the new boards that I'm cutting. You can use any saw to get this job done. You can use a skill saw, a hand saw, a table saw with a miter gauge or a crosscut sled, or your chop saw. Whatever you have to be able to cut these down, just make sure you're getting them the same height as the previous boards we cut for the face. With those cuts complete, we now have the backs and sides of our wooden jack-o'-lanterns. We still need to cut the sides to width, but we haven't cut the height. Next up is to cut this bigger piece on the top of our wooden jack-o'-lanterns, which is 7 inches wide. We're still working with that same cedar fence picket that we got for $3.98 from the big box store, and that should be all we need for these two wooden jack-o'-lanterns. Let's go ahead and cut those two 7-inch pieces. With those two cuts complete, we have these 7-inch tops for the first layer of the top of the wooden jack-o'-lanterns. For our next cuts, we're going to switch the table saw to a rip cut position so that we can cut the dog ears off of each side of this last little bit we have left of our cedar fence picket. We're going to hold on to those because we're using those for the stem, but we need to get to this middle section to cut the second top part for the two wooden jack-o'-lanterns. With that complete, we've now got 3 pieces. All we did was cut those dog ears right off of the one piece we had left. If you're going to sacrifice any size, sacrifice a bit of the width on the dog ears, not on this bigger piece, because we're already getting very close to too small of a piece to make that top look good. We're going to save these dog ear cutoffs because these are going to turn into our stems, and this is going to be the second piece on the top of our 2 jack-o'-lanterns. We just need to cut it evenly in half. With those 2 pieces cut, that gives us our centerpiece for the top of our wooden jack-o'-lanterns. Last to cut are the lengths on our stem. Our stems are going to use that dog ear to do the angle for our stem. We just need to cut it to length. You can use whatever preference you have on these. I usually do a few inches, and I vary them a little bit so that there's some different character to each of the 2 pumpkins. Make sure you're careful when making these cuts. We're starting to get down to some really small pieces, so you need to make sure you keep your fingers away from that blade and stay safe. Keep in mind that when you're cutting those, you want to include the angle from the original dog ear on that cedar fence picket. That's going to turn into the angle for our stem on top of our wooden jack-o'-lantern. I made these 2.5 inches and 2.75 inches just to give a little variance and a little personality to each of the pumpkins. With these 2 stems cut, I'm done with the cross-cut sled and I can put that away. We have a few more cuts to make before we have all of our pieces cut to size. We need to take those 2 side pieces and cut them down to length a couple times so that we get 2 2.5-inch wooden pieces for each of the sides of the wooden jack-o'-lanterns. Once that's complete, we'll have all our pieces cut and we can start assembly. And with that last cut, we now have all the pieces down to size to do our assembly. But there's one thing I wanted to point out. If you recall, I said that we were going to build 2 wooden jack-o'-lanterns out of 1 cedar fence picket from the big box store. And this is all we have left for the leftover pieces. We have the 2 offcuts from the stem and 2 offcuts from these side pieces that we just cut. This is the only thing that we're throwing in the burn barrel or throwing in the garbage. Let's go ahead and grab the brad nailer, grab the wood glue, and go ahead and get set up for that assembly. Now that I'm set up for the assembly, there's a few things I want to point out. First off, you should have 7 pieces cut for each of the wooden jack-o'-lanterns. You should have a face and a back that are 8.5 inches long. You should have 2 side pieces for each jack-o'-lantern that are 8.5 inches long and 2.75 inches wide. Make sure when you're cutting those side pieces to width that you don't accidentally grab the top piece that you cut that's at 7 inches. Otherwise, you're going to be really disappointed when you go to assemble this. You have the top piece then, the 2 side pieces, and the second top piece, and your stem. I'm using a brad nailer with 3/4 inch brad nails in there, and I'm going to use an exterior wood glue since these most likely will be out on someone's front step and could be getting hit with the rain. Feel free to argue down in the comments the best way to assemble these. I'm going to use both. If you'd like to use wood glue and clamps or just nails, feel free to go ahead and do that. Whatever works for you, but I find the method of using both of them with a glue that holds for a long stay and brad nails that hold it in the meantime so I don't need to wait on clamps works out the best for me. The first part that needs to happen is to make the main body of the wooden jack-o'-lantern. That consists of the face, the back, and the 2 sides. I'm going to go ahead and get those pieces pulled out of these piles, grab the wood glue and the brad nails, and get those assembled. Make sure you use an exterior rated wood glue in case these get rained on. I like to use Boss Dog wood glue, which has an exterior rating on this particular type, but you can use anything else that's good for outdoors, like a Titebond 3. Now, regardless of how you're assembling it, make sure you get those edges lined up so that everything looks flush. And also make sure you've got a wet towel around if you're using glue to clean up any of that squeeze out as you go along. Now that I've got one box done, it's time to go ahead and take care of the other one. With both of the main boxes assembled, now's a great time to make sure we have our glue squeeze out cleaned up if you use glue, and then to hit this with a sander just to get some of the rough edges off. I did run mine through the planer, so a lot of the main surfaces are still nice and smooth, but I want to hit the edges a little bit just to give it that nice final touch. Like I said, just a little bit of sanding to smooth out those edges and maybe take care of any leftover glue squeeze out, especially if you ran it through the planer and it's already pretty smooth. One thing I wanted to point out, when you're doing the first part of the assembly, make sure you pick the best side of these face boards to point out. Typically, depending on what kind of bit you use, there could be a little bit of tear out on one of the sides, so just check those over before you assemble. If you've got any roughness inside these cuts, you can use a little bit of sandpaper to clean those up. We're to the home stretch now. All we've got to do is the first top board, the second top board, and of course that stem. When you're doing these tops, we're going to use glue and 4 brad nails, one around each corner. Keep in mind when you're lining up your brad nailer that you've got a small area to nail into, so make sure you're not accidentally shooting it into the inside of the pumpkin, or even worse, the outside of the pumpkin. Then you're going to have to get some pliers and yank that nail back out. Let's go ahead and get 2 tops nailed onto both of these, and then we'll move on to the stem. And now our 2 wooden jack-o'-lanterns have a pair of tops. One thing I wanted to point out is that these smaller top pieces do have a longer side. So make sure that longer side is going the width of the wooden jack-o'-lantern so that the proportions look correct on the top. The last thing to go on our wooden jack-o'-lanterns is to install the stems. One word of caution for you is these stems are attached with wood glue and brad nails. They don't have a lot of surface contact area, so it's possible they may break off when they're stored from season to season. I haven't had a big issue with it, but just make sure you're using plenty of glue, and those brad nails are going to give you a little bit extra hold. Let's go ahead and get those on, and we can call this project done. And with that, I've got 2 wooden jack-o'-lanterns made from 1 cedar fence picket that I got for $3.98 at the big box store. Pair them with a couple tea candles, and they make a great decoration for the Halloween season out on your front step. I hope you enjoyed this video and are excited about batching out some wooden jack-o'-lanterns. If you want to get some templates of your own to make the process easier, I'll have a link to my online store in the description. There I currently have 12 different Halloween themed face templates, as well as some winter-themed face templates. Down below, I'll also post a link to the tools I specifically use with the templates that include the two-sided tape, the router bit, and the guide bushing. If you're interested in any of the other tools that I use in this project video or any of my other project videos, make sure to check out my tool list link down in the description that has links to my table saw, miter saw, brad nailer, and even the clamps that I use. If you'd like to make some wooden jack-o'-lanterns but don't want to invest in the templates right now, what I'm going to do is make my cut list available to everyone for free so you have the exact dimensions of each one of these wooden pieces. That way you can cut them on the tools that you have now, cut the faces by hand, and give the wooden jack-o'-lanterns a try before investing much money into it. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed this entire project video. Happy making, and I'll see you on the next video. These wooden jack-o'-lanterns are great to make. Do not knock the board over. Ooh, don't do that, you idiot. That angle is going to form the part of our stem that makes it an actual stem. That doesn't make any sense. That's stupid. Someone's mowing the lawn and it's really annoying, but I guess they got to mow their lawn. You've watched all the way to the end of this video, and I greatly appreciate the amount of time that took. To thank you for doing that, I'd like to give you a code for 10% off one template set in my online store. The code to use at checkout will be YouTube10. That's YOUTUBE and the number 10. Use that in the field at checkout and you'll get 10% off one template set order. Other than that, I'll see you on the next project. Happy making!